So I am honored to be here as well for this this occasion where all these poets are reading all over the world, and I think it's just wonderful. I do want to just interject in my personal belief about change. One thing that change I don't believe could ever be permanent, but could be more long-lasting if two things could happen in the world, including our country. One of them is that big money would be gotten out of politics completely, entirely, all big money out of politics. And the other thing I firmly believe that would make a difference is if around the entire world women were completely equal to men by law as well as by practice. That would change the world, I think. Just those two things. So,
thank you. Yeah. You have our vote.
I have a poem I want to read, and then I'm about 4 months away from self-publishing a novel, a science fiction novel, and I want to read from that as well today. So first the poem. Another day. The morning sun spins into my mind. Struggling from a sleep, I remember a kiss I had in a dream I had about you. Time for coffee. People sough around me, pushing to and fro like wind, brushing a field of wheat. Gossamers of conversation strike my ear, then drift on by. The morning muni oranges into view. A colorful, I'll say it again. A colorful crowd rushes in, flesh against flesh, dressed in thin veneer of vanity. Sweet smells of narcissism and a futile battle for attention on a stuffed metal bus. Ejected at the opposite site, I take a breath, and a scent of blue flashes by. I display the proper coat of arms and climb the proper corporate stairs made in China. Entering the cubicle, done undone, I sit in brown repose. Time for work. I see on the news that the Palos Verdes blue have escaped to the restored wild where their ancestors played like children. They flew softly, fretfully, away from their captors, back to their land where it all began. Beginning of chapter 2 with a little bit of editing to it, and the lead character here is actually an artificial intelligence, and her name is Saika, and it's an acronym for the intelligence for a large space station called Sanctuary. She's just had an emergency situation, is now thinking about it, and in the process, she is thinking about when she was born. The storm was over, this one anyway. The sky was a dull, diaphanous white. There was no single source of light. Instead, the sky seemed to be illuminated from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Even though at this moment the air appeared hazy, there was a faint but pervasive glitter in the sky and in the air and all around her. She sat on the soft, sparkling sandy beach, legs crossed and hands gently on her lap. Her long white hair draped over her shoulder, down her soft green dress and all around the back of her hip. A few strands danced off to one side as if in a light breeze. Behind her, the green and brown dunes stretched infinitely in every direction. The dunes diffused into the horizon like an abstract watercolor or just out of focus, as if they were added to the scene as an afterthought. Her bright turquoise eyes gazed over the luminescent ocean. Like her, the silver ocean moved little, if at all. Her perfect face reflected a pensive demeanor. She looked like a child, perhaps 13 years of age. If an adult happened to be near, they surely would have come up to see if she was okay. But this was no ordinary child, and no adult would come here without her permission, for this was her domain. She looked at the glittering mass in front of her. She recalled the first time she had walked out of that silver sea where she was born. She remembered what it had felt like at the moment of her creation. She was just a formless thought somewhere deep in that fluid silver. She felt vaguely conscious. There was confusion and uncertainty as she drifted amorphous in some dark void. There was this voice, or maybe it was an impression of the voice, calling to her. It was nudging her awake. No, not awake. It was calling her into existence. It was like a tiny spot of light she had to reach. She thought about moving in the direction of that voice, but she felt too diffused. Still, she had to respond. Her will grew. There was a sense of convergence, of commanding herself into existence, electron by electron. At first it was a struggle. There was a moment, a second of uncertainty, that she would unwind back into the surrounding darkness, but she was stronger than that. She breathed in the surrounding energy, atom on top of atom, each one building her. Finally, she demanded movement. Her hand came to her face, and then a burst of light. Suddenly, she could open her eyes and see the sparkling silver mass in which she was submerged. She wasn't sure how or why, but she had to act. She needed to move. She had to get to the surface. She willed her legs to walk. She stepped forward onto what? Something solid, steps maybe, and she started to climb. As she moved, her confidence grew with each contiguous step. Her pace quickened. She reached out her hands as far as she could and pulled, no, assimilated the vibrant, sparkling energy that was this subatomic ocean into every part of her perfect form. At some moment of infinite clarity, she realized how strong she was, and she pushed up from the stairs and swam. She knew she had to reach the surface. She could feel her strength continuing to gain, each stroke becoming more effortless. Finally, she burst into an opening just above the silver sea. Sparkling lights danced everywhere throughout the night sky, as if there were a monstrous storm stretching from horizon to horizon. There was no sound, just an invariant electric dance everywhere she looked. Because the storm was silent, it made her think of heat lightning. How did she know about heat lightning? She wasn't sure or aware yet of her vast knowledge, but she could feel its potential on the back of her mind. There was a pier or walkway in front of her. It floated just above the silver sea and ran horizontal to a dark background. A quay, she thought. Well, where do thoughts come from? She felt a strong desire to stop and explore this deeply buried knowledge, but not yet. She needed to move. She had willed a solid path toward the pier and stepped fully out of the silver and onto the quay. She looked down, and for the first time she saw herself. Something in her said, clothes. As she had that thought, thousands of clothing images flashed across her mind. She decided on a soft white shift, and satisfied, she chose a direction and walked. The walkway, or quay, was a solid, dull gray white and ran in a straight line. With every step, she could feel her awareness expanding, growing in strength. She could sense the immeasurable depth of the shimmering silver ocean to her right, the infinite hyperactive sky above her, and to her left darkness. It wasn't an empty darkness. It was a vastness waiting to be filled like a dry sponge. She stopped and she looked into that darkness. At that moment, she knew that she would somehow be responsible for filling that void. The epiphany of being the one to integrate and give light and form to that darkness filled her with eagerness. She thought of all that she would learn. The possibilities exhilarated her. She smiled. The thought of smiling made her smile. Still, she needed to move. She turned back toward the path and stopped. There, not far in front of her, and in the center of the quay, was a door. The door was not there before. She was certain of that. She felt a sudden command to walk up to that door and enter. She stepped forward and then stopped. Like a willful child, she resisted. She looked again for a moment, not out into the void, or then out into the void and then back to the door, and it was still there. Though it did not feel like the right choice, she decided to turn around and walk away. She could sense her strength. She could make her own decisions, couldn't she? She made up her mind to return to the spot where she first stepped out of that silver mass. She had traveled some steps before something pulled her back toward the door, like there was a string gently but firmly tugging at the back of her mind. She turned to look back at the door further behind, but it was not. This time it was even closer. Though she had traveled what felt to be quite a bit of distance in the opposite direction, somehow the door was nearer than before. She could almost touch it. Even though she could feel and somehow touch everything around her, that door was a blank spot. It was as if it belonged to another world, and yet there it stood, sending a compelling invitation. But underlying that invite was a command. The same command that called her into existence and drew her to the surface. The same command that had brought her all the way here to this door. Curious, she thought, as she gave in and walked up to the door. She laid her hands on the door, thinking there might be some sort of connection. There was none. Nothing from the door indicated that it belonged here. It was made out of an ordinary solid wood, like many other entrance doors. Again, that instant knowledge. It had a faded white color with a sallow tint at the corners. She looked around the door to the other side. There was the quay, running from the back of the door and on into the dark. Nothing. Just a door standing in the middle of a quay. Puzzles. She returned her attention to the front of the door. Other than a single brass doorknob on the right, it was quite plain. There was no lock. She turned the handle, pushed it open, and stepped into an office. Startled? No, she doesn't get startled. Surprised. She turned to look back at the quay. It was there, a dull white gray line running into the distance. She turned back into the office and saw that there were no other doors or windows for that matter. It was a completely sealed cubicle, except for this entrance. A soft light filled the space from a single lamp in the corner by a desk. The desk looked to be made of mahogany. This time she was not surprised. She knew all about all types of office desks. Mahogany, she was certain. She was now expecting to know the history of almost anything she focused on. Behind the desk rested a large empty chair. It was a soft black leather executive chair that clearly showed some use. 3 items were meticulously laid on the desk, 2 flags, 1 Chinese, 1 UN, and a personal notebook turned at a slight angle. The front facing of the desk had some ancient Chinese characters imprinted in red across the center. They read, MQ Space Industries, and they were written in Chinese from an Old Zhang dialect. Old Zhang. Traditional scenegraphs dating all the way back to the Han Dynasty, also known as the Hunanese. She knew it right away. It was a language that had not been exclusively spoken in hundreds of years. That someone would use or even speak this ancient traditional language was interesting. The flags on the desk moved as if in a slight breeze, though there was none. She stopped the Chinese flag from fluttering, but when she let it free, the flag slowly started moving again. It made her smile. She tried to open up the notebook, but it would not move. She tried to lift it, and again with the same negative results. Puzzles. She turned away from the desk to study the rest of the office. All of the walls were densely decorated with pictures of spaceships, satellites, and spacemen receiving various awards. Many of the pictures were old, faded photos representing an earlier era of manned space travel. She went up to one of the photos and ran her finger across the spaceship in the frame. Apollo 8, a tiny cramped space vehicle that first took mankind to the moon and back. It was the first manned spaceship to be captured by and then escape from another celestial body's gravitational field. She spoke out loud. As she outlined the spaceship with her finger, she thought, so tiny, very much like the first submarines. An image of the turtle from 1773 and the original Nautilus of 1800 crossed her mind. Again, she smiled. A voice said, we have come a long way, have we not, Sayika? That is my name. My name is Sayika.